as $15,000 billion. And not being Ron Johnson, I had to stop and think, is it really that big? Is it really that large? I remember back in the mid-1990s when I first knew our next speaker, young congressman named Mark Neumann, and he gave me a plaque, actually it was a freebie, gave me a plaque that said, remember when Bill Clinton ran on, it's the economy stupid, he gave me a plaque that said, it's the national debt stupid. I'm not sure that everybody understood how big a problem that would be. I'm not sure that anyone even imagined how huge the national debt would grow. I think that Congressman Mark Neumann was one of them. He needs no introduction. Our next speaker, former Congressman Mark Neumann.
Appleton earlier this evening, and it's just like here, the rooms are packed full of people. I can't tell you how invigorating it is to see this kind of a turnout and this kind of a response to get Scott Walker reelected. And that is what it's all about, isn't it? Yeah. I'm start by introducing the most important person in my life. She travels with me almost everywhere she goes. Most of you know the story by now that I met her in the 4th grade Sunday school class. I'll tell you what she wore to our Christmas things in 6th grade. I dated her all through high school except the year she gave me off for bad behavior. She was valedictorian of her class and a very beautiful woman, my wonderful wife, Sue. I next want to say something that's a little bit difficult as a Senate candidate to say. The race for the United States Senate in the state of Wisconsin is not the most important race in this state. Our first and primary job in the state of Wisconsin is re-elect Scott Walker as governor, re-elect Rebecca Clayfish, and hold the Senate. That came out. Here comes the next part. It's also very important, folks, that we don't wake up in June or July of this year and figure out we've missed an opportunity to send a conservative senator to join Ron Johnson in the battle to restore this nation in our nation's capital. Also very, very important as we move forward in this country. America's in trouble, folks. When I look at what's going on in this country today, it's just downright scary. And Charlie, where'd Charlie go? Charlie, you mentioned that debt thing. For whatever it's worth, I had 2 copies of that. The second copy is now sitting on my desk in my office at home. It is the debt, stupid. And then in Clinton's words, I wasn't calling Charlie stupid, just for the record. So I was kind of trouble. It is the debt. When I look at what's happened, Barack Obama has led us into the worst economy maybe in the history of the world, but certainly in the history of the United States of America. As we look at unemployment rates, as we look at virtually anything you want to look at, they've added nearly 50% to the debt in just the last 4 years. Our debt is $15 trillion, folks, and it's devastating in the future of this country. So what do we need to do? We need to look at your past experience just as we would in any business problem and figure out where we need to go with this country. So I look back at my experience, 25 years in business and 4 years in Congress, and I can't help but think about the last time I went to Congress, and our economic situation facing America was very similar to what we're seeing today, and it was similar types of problems. What you hear Ron Johnson talk about, very similar to what we saw when we went in back in the 90s. And I went to Washington, D.C. with no experience in politics in any way, shape, or form, a new congressperson, not knowing what to expect. And I've got lots of stories to tell in the interest that you've been here for a long time tonight. I'm just going to tell one very brief story of what I found. We got there. Debt exploding, deficits exploding, America in trouble, unemployment growing, our economy in the tank. And I went to one of my first committee meetings, and they were marking up a bill. That means they were deciding what they're going to spend. And we sat in that room, and they went around congressman to congressperson to congressperson to congressperson, and each one added something into that bill. America in serious problem, and they kept adding more and more. Finally, it got to my turn. I was the least senior member in the committee. And Bob Livingston, the chairman, got to me. He said, "Mr. Neumann from Wisconsin, what would you like to add to this piece of legislation?" And I said, "Well, I don't want to add anything to this legislation. I just want to ask a question. You're about to spend $3 billion. In the world I come from, before you spend $3 billion, we ask a question. You want to guess what that question might be? Where is the money coming from?" Well, they threw down their pens and looked at me like I was from another planet or doing something wrong or what have you. Folks, they couldn't believe I asked the question. What happened next was pretty amazing to me. They started talking to me about the fact that if this is a Republican committee and you are a Republican, you have to vote for the bill whether you like it or not. And I said, wait a minute, I'm not voting for a bill I don't like, whatever party it is and whatever that means. Finally, our leadership started telling me, and they started repeating this story, you are a Republican on a Republican committee, you have to vote for the bill. Finally, it was a man that's in the news quite a bit lately, and by the way, the man is brilliant, but we happen to disagree on this particular issue. Newt Gingrich himself, he puts his arm around me, and he says, walk with me, Mark, because you don't get this. Mark, you're from the private sector. You're a business person, and you don't understand politics, and I want to help you. And he genuinely believed he was trying to help me. He says, you don't understand how this works. You're a freshman member of Congress on the Appropriations Committee. It's a Republican bill. You have to vote for it. And I looked back and I said, well, Newt, as soon as somebody can tell me where the money's coming to pay for this bill, I'll be happy to vote for it. And he said, no, you don't get it. You have to vote for it. Finally, he's looking me in the eye, and I'll pick on you this evening. He's looking me in the eye just like this, and he says to me, Mark Neumann, you just don't get it. You either vote for this bill or your career in politics is over. And for whatever reason, folks, what came out of my mouth next was not planned. It was a reflex reaction. I looked back and I said, Newt, I'm a home builder. And I turned and walked away. Folks, fundamentally, what's wrong in this great country is that people can't look back in the face of politicians that are doing the wrong thing for our future and say, I'm a home builder, or I'm a plumber, or I'm an electrician, or you name it down the line. We need people from the private sector to serve in government. What happened next is pretty amazing. I voted against the bill. Next thing I know, I'm sitting on the floor of the House of Representatives, and Bob Livingston comes up to me again. This time he puts his arm around me. And by the way, in politics, if your arm's around you, you're in trouble, just so you know. He says, Mark Neumann, I want you to go back to your office. I want you to turn off your phone and lock the doors, and you might survive. And I'm going, survive? He says, you've just been kicked off the Appropriations Committee because you refused to vote for this bill. I went back to my office, and I sat there for a while and thought about it. And remember, I've been married 38 years. My whole family's back here in Wisconsin. I'm out in D.C. by myself, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. I'm from the business world, and I thought we did the right thing. So that night I wrote a letter, and I delivered it to every member of the House of Representatives, Democrat and Republican. And I said, you know, if I vote my conscience and I do what I believe is in the best interest of the future of the United States of America, and I got kicked off a committee for doing this, then I'm sorry, I only have one committee to get kicked off of. And I delivered it. Folks, what happened the next day, I didn't expect. I wasn't in politics, didn't know what to expect. But basically, the whole world exploded around me. So I was kicked off this committee. This letter's been delivered. And I'm basically a person sitting in the corner because everybody's afraid to talk to me because I've just been punished out here in this Congress. What happened next changed America, and I'm so proud of those people I served with. 25 members of our freshman class went to Newt Gingrich, and he said, this is not how we're going to run this place. And they said to him, we're not going to vote for any more bills until you get this situation corrected. Newt Gingrich wound up placing me on both Budget Committee and Appropriations, and that may not mean a lot in this room. It's the only time in the history of the United States of America that a first-term congressman was allowed to serve on these two major committees, Appropriations, where they spend the money, and Budget Committee, where we see both the comings and the goings of the money. What happened is it gave our class, 72 members, access to information that we never would have had access to before, and it allowed us to work together as a team then to be a guiding influence as we got that budget balanced. Over the next 4 years, we inherited problems like what we have today. We realized, folks, that if we cut taxes and let people keep more of their own money, at the same time we brought down government spending, that our economy would be restored. We understood that money in the hands of the private sector, of you, the people, would either get saved or spent, either of which led to economic growth and development. It is the exact opposite of what they're trying to do in Washington, D.C. today. And it's that understanding that led me back into this Senate race and my fear for the future of this country. I mentioned before how bad things are. And I mentioned that we draw on business experience. Let me tell you what 25 years of business experience tells me to do. 25 years of business experience says understand the problem. We've spent the last 6 months going through this budget in great detail. I have a pretty good grasp on what exactly the problem is in Washington, D.C. as it relates to the monetary part. Then I would lay out a vision for where we need to go and what we need to do to restore this great nation. So let me walk you through what I need to do, what we need to do in this nation. It starts right here in Wisconsin, because the eyes of the entire country are on this state right now today. And the recall election of Scott Walker, the first thing we need to do to restore America is re-elect Scott Walker and his team to lead our state. What do we need to do to turn this country around? The next thing we need to do is end Obamacare because it's killing jobs in this country. What do we need to do? We need to return to our Constitution and restore our religious freedoms that are being under attack at this point in time. And folks, the area where I will spend the most time on, we need to balance our federal budget so Washington quits spending more money than they have, and we can restore our economy and create jobs out here in the private sector once again. To that end, you have a commitment from me as a candidate for the United States Senate that we will in fact lay out a plan to balance the budget in the foreseeable future, not like Barack Obama in Never Never Land. We will lay out a very specific plan as to how we're going to go about balancing the federal budget. And when the naysayers say you can't do it, I'm going to say I heard that before, and we got it done. And we're going to do it again, because that's what's necessary to restore the economy of this great nation. With a very brief story, and it's a story that I tell in a lot of different places. Charlie, you'll probably like this story because of the name of the person involved. When Sue and I made the decision this summer to run for this office, we had gone back and forth on the decision, to be honest with you. When we finally came around and firmed up our decision and came to the conclusion it was necessary to do this for the good of the future of this country, my son, who's got 3 of our grandkids in his house, had an internal house discussion. What does it mean for Grandpa to run for the United States Senate? And it obviously has an impact on all of our lives. Well, shortly, I wasn't privy to that discussion, by the way. Shortly after that discussion, they're over at our house, and I'm sitting on the front steps as they're about to leave our house. And my son, Andy, says to my 3-year-old grandson, whose name is Charlie, by the way, who gets his dead stuff like you mentioned. So Andy says to Charlie, my 3-year-old grandson, tell Grandpa why he should run for the United States Senate. And Charlie, that little guy, 3 years old, loud, strong voice, looks up at me and says, Grandpa, tell him to quit spending my money. My little 3-year-old grandson understands something that the other side doesn't get at all. Washington cannot continue spending more money than they have. Folks, I want to wrap this up. We live in the United States of America. This is the greatest nation in the world by far, bar any other in the history of mankind. And it's our privilege to live in this great nation today. It's also our responsibility to see to it that we give this great nation on to our children and our grandchildren in a better shape than what we found it. I'm such an optimist, folks. I really believe that the best days in the United States of America are still ahead of us. Thank you, and God bless you.